All right, you're good to go.
All right. Thank you, Julian. So we're recording this meeting and we're streaming it to the city's YouTube channel where it will be available for watching later. If you know of anybody who couldn't make it tonight and wants to watch it. Greetings, I'm Eric Lashinsky, Chief of Comprehensive Planning with the City of Annapolis in the Planning and Zoning Department. So I know most of you, but I see some new faces. Thanks for making it. This is our second Choice Neighborhood Initiative, Neighborhood Task Force meeting. Choice Eastport is what we're calling our planning effort. And this is just a month after our first meeting. So we're trying to do these, the goal is to do these meetings monthly. That was kind of the consensus at the last meeting. So we'll do another one at the end of August. And I'm going to go ahead and just flip to the next slide. So because we have some new folks, you know, maybe at some point we'll get to a point we don't have to do introductions anymore, but for now, let's go ahead and do them. Want to make sure everybody knows everybody else. So I'll start. Yeah, just introduced myself, but we'll go through folks from the city, City of Annapolis. I guess we'll start with Michael Laplace. Oh, you're on mute, I think.
Hi, yeah, sorry about that. Welcome everybody. Michael Laplace, Director of Planning and Zoning.
Great, thanks for being here. Teresa.
Good evening, Teresa Wellman, Chief of Community Development for the City of Annapolis.
And so Michael, Teresa and I are part of the core team from the City of Annapolis in this project. And we have some folks from other departments who are part of the Neighborhood Task Force, also from the city. So Captain Miguez.
Good evening. I'm Captain Amy Miguez with Annapolis Police Department.
And then we have Marcus.
Good evening, everyone. I'm Marcus Moore with the city's Department of Transportation.
Glad you could make it. And I know Marcia Patrick from our Department of Public Works and Archie Trader from our Department of Recreation and Parks are both on the Neighborhood Task Force as well. Could not make it tonight. Perhaps they'll join later. Let's go ahead. We have a planning consultant team that is shepherding this project. And actually, before we introduce the plan team, Housing Authority folks, our partner on this project, Melissa, why don't you go ahead?
Melissa Maddox Evans, Executive Director, HACA.
Bridget.
Sorry, good evening, everyone. Bridget McLaughlin, Director of Resident Services at HACA.
And Alex.
Alex Weller, Capital Projects Manager for HACA.
Great. I see Denise is on. Sorry if I missed you before. Denise from City of Annapolis. Introduce yourself, please. I think you're on mute. Can't hear you, but I'll come back to you. Denise is in our community development and economic development division here at Planning and Zoning. I think I got all of the folks from Housing Authority. Well, so our planning team includes folks from EJP. Maggie, you're here, right?
I am. Hi, Maggie Morrell with EJP Consulting Group. As Eric said, we are assisting as the planning coordinator, and our wonderful partner is Matthew Fitzsimmons, who I know is on as well, if he wants to introduce himself.
Hey, this is Matthew Fitzsimmons, planning with Hort Copley Mock out of Baltimore, planning and architecture. Thanks.
Great, glad you both could be here. So now, I want to kind of go through everyone else, and please share if you're affiliated with an institution or organization, or if you're just a neighborhood resident. It'd be great to share that as well. I'm just going to go down the list I have here. So Bill Reichert.
Yeah, I'm Bill Reichert. I'm president of the Eastport Civic Association.
Paul.
Paul Rankin, Secretary, Eastport Civic Association. Happy to be here.
All right. Chanel.
Sorry, Chanel Compton, Maryland Commission on African American History and Culture in the Banneker Douglas Museum.
Great. Franklin.
Franklin Baker, President and CEO of United Way of Central Maryland and Annapolis resident.
Glad you could make it. Jeanette.
Hi, I'm an Eastport resident over in Boucher Place, neighbor of Harbor House, and I'm also a teacher over at the Key School.
Jess Packler.
Hi, I'm Jess Packler. I'm a resident on President Street, the 500 block of President Street. I'm also a parent at Eastport, Annapolis Middle, Annapolis High, and involved in the PTAs at all three, as well as admin for the Eastport Neighborhood Forum.
Great. Julie, I should have introduced you as part of the planning team. Apologies. See you here.
No worries. Hi, I'm Julie Snyder. I am the Director of Community Engagement with the Community Action Agency, and I am supporting the CNI.
Karen.
Hi, I'm Karen Jennings. I live at the corner of President Street and Park Avenue in Eastport, right across the street from Harbor House. And I also currently sit on the Annapolis Conservancy Board.
Kimberly.
Hi, Kimberly Richer, live on Boucher Ave and also on the Board of Directors for Charting Careers.
Great. Lisa. You're on mute. Well, Lisa was at, I think, last month's meeting and is a neighborhood resident. So glad you could be here. I'm going to dive right in. So, some of what I'm going to share now is redundant from the last meeting. I think we have some new people here. I think it's important to, I might even keep reminding folks of this information in the future meetings, but just as a way of explaining this choice neighborhood process. My computer is not advancing for some reason. Let's see here. There we go. I just have a few introductory slides just to make sure we're kind of all on the same page here with this project. This is our standard schedule slide timeline, just to kind of remind folks of where we are here. We're in the very beginnings of this project, the assessment phase, we call it. So we're still collecting a lot of information about the existing neighborhood, the housing community, and we're doing a lot of surveying of current residents in Eastport Terrace and Harbor House apartments. And all of that work is being led by our planning consultant working with the Housing Authority and the city. And that's going to go through next month. So it's a big lift, but then we're going to move into the visioning phase, which is for the fall, and then ultimately the strategies, and then eventually implementation next year. So we're trying to stay on schedule here. I should say, we're really under the gun to have a master plan in place by next summer. So that's what this is all moving towards, a community-supported consensus master plan for revitalizing the Eastport Terrace and Harbor House apartment communities, and something everybody can get behind, both current residents of those communities and the neighborhood that you all are representing tonight. So I'm happy to answer any questions along the way. Just interrupt me.
Eric, can I interrupt you already? This is Paul.
Sure.
What in like 20 words or less, what constitutes a completed master plan that you have to have available by next summer? And don't get crazy on just, but more or less, what does that mean?
I'll start, and then Maggie and Matthew could chime in if you'd like. But we have to have a plan that is clear about the new development that is being proposed to replace what is there today. The mix of housing and potentially other uses that really allows us to move towards actually redeveloping these communities, and bringing a developer partner on board that kind of understands what the community is looking for. So we can show some examples maybe in the next meeting that might be a good thing to do. What that look, I think there's some images later in the presentation that show the kind of graphics that help to communicate the master plan vision.
It's great for me. So thank you so much. Perfect.
Okay. Well, this, in essence, is what we're looking for in a task force member. We appreciate everybody who volunteered to be on this task force. I like to think it can be as much as you want it to be in terms of your commitment here. I mean, at minimum, it's attending these meetings, but beyond that, it is helping to get your neighbors interested in this project and helping to promote what we're doing and helping to educate and clarify if people have questions that you hear about, identifying opportunities for partnerships that can participate in this project. I think everyone here brings a certain expertise or knowledge that I think will come to bear on this project and help it succeed. So we want you to chime in. We shared at the last meeting from HUD's perspective, it's the U.S. Housing and Urban Development Department that is funding this. This is really what they talk about as kind of neighborhood goals. And these are different. There's housing goals, there's neighbor goals, and there's people goals. That's how the Choice Neighborhood Program is set up. It's those three pillars. They're related, obviously. And this is what we're talking about with neighborhood goals. It's open-ended, but these are the four areas that that HUD emphasizes where we want to make improvements. Excuse me. And this is just a way to clarify and visualize these areas of opportunity, I would say, or challenge in some cases. It's a way to think about neighborhood and neighborhood planning. We address, these are the broad topics that we tend to address when we do neighborhood planning, all interrelated. It's hard to have one without the other. So the first discussion for tonight, I want to kind of dive into an easy question here. This is a complicated one, but it's something that came up at the last meeting. We did a discussion around these two questions, and I did my best to write down what I was hearing on this board, and this is what I heard. And revitalization came up a lot, even if it wasn't mentioned by that, by that word. People were kind of talking around revitalization and this idea of a revitalized neighborhood. So we thought it would be good to unpack that, to take a deeper dive into what we mean by a revitalized neighborhood. And it's clearly very subjective. We don't, as speaking for the city or other people involved in this project, we don't have a definitive idea. I would say, everything that includes, but we have ideas on what it should include. And so I want to just open up the discussion here. I have another bulletin board that I'm going to use to take some notes here. And so for the rest of the presentation, what we're going to do, I'd like to talk about this idea of a revitalized neighborhood and what people think of when they think of that, what's important. And following that, we'll do that for, say, the next 20 minutes. And then we're going to go in and I'm going to share some of what we've talked about in some recent plans that I think have addressed some of that. And then we're going to show some examples of how other places have focused on kind of a complete neighborhood identity. And then we'll have some time for more discussion at the end about specific objectives and early action projects. So with that, I just want to open it up. If anybody has any immediate ideas, or perhaps people who were here last month and were interested in this idea. Any thoughts?
Since there's quiet, I'll throw in 2 cents. I'd had an opportunity at the most recent visit to the area that was put together by Melissa Evans. Thank you. To talk with Mr. Fitzsimmons, the architect, and one of the issues that seemed pretty clear as a problem was access to amenities for the individuals living in the neighborhood, meaning something as simple as a grocery store. It's hard to get there from there. So I think that's an issue that ought to be looked at.
Thank you for breaking the ice, Paul. Yeah, so you were on the recent tour, is that?
Yes, Ms. Maddox Evans put together a tour this last week, which was fabulous.
Great. Jess, it looks like, sorry, I should say, I mean, we appreciate if people raise their hands, but we have a small group tonight, so I don't mind it. I'll do my best to see hands raised. Jess, go ahead.
Sure. So I think a revitalized neighborhood is, as it relates to us, I mean, it's going to look different, no matter, if you're in different places, but as it relates to us, is one, I think what Paul said, definitely access to, I wouldn't say amenities, but access to necessities like grocery stores, banks, other parts of urban living that you need access to, pedestrian, walkable, easily accessible necessities of daily life. A revitalized neighborhood focuses on diversity and has a range of socioeconomic opportunities, both for living and for working. Has a strong school, though I know that's not the city's purview. But in general and then also has access to amenities such as recreation and other benefits of life, I guess, the positive sides of life. Particularly here in Eastport, water access, access to, easy transportation and easy walkability or bikeability to various things. I think that's all part of what a revitalized neighborhood plus safety, so when you get up on Saturday morning, there isn't a crime scene investigation happening across the street from your house.
Yeah.
But in general, I mean, I like to think of us as a small, we're a small urban neighborhood. And I hope that when we're discussing revitalization, we're focusing on that, right? We are not a suburban neighborhood. We are not rural, and we aren't a big inner city neighborhood either. We are a small urban neighborhood, and there's a lot of benefits that come with that which is why we live here.
Good point.
Can I add in real quick, Eric, that I know, Jess, I think you said, you mentioned education and not the purview of the city, but as part of our overall planning process and transformation of the neighborhood, we're definitely looking at education because one of the goals is really focusing in on improving educational outcomes for the residents that are there at Eastport Terrace and Harbor House now. But we have started talking with Eastport Elementary School and just understanding what their sort of recovery plan is going to be. So we're getting familiar with that. So that is definitely important. So let's keep that education in there. That's part of a revitalizing.
Oh, I mean, but I think when you say recovery plan, what do you mean by that?
They're a neighborhood school. I mean, the designation that they have to produce a school because of the number of free and reduced lunches and that sort of stuff. There's a sort of plan that they're working on right now. That they did a needs assessment.
You mean that we're communities? We're a community.
There we go. Yes, that's it.
Is that what you mean? Yeah, I would like to not use the word recovery school because that makes it sound like there's something we're recovering from. And Eastport is a phenomenal school.
Absolutely.
And it's a great educational opportunity for kids who go there. So I just want to, I meant more that, when we talk about educational opportunity, the community school part, that's a huge part, and that connections and the resources that the school can create. And I'm a big part of that. I'm part of the PTA. My kids have been at that school for 10 years. That's a huge part, but I meant in terms of the actual, the city can't do anything about the teachers that are hired or anything. We're lucky that we don't have to worry about that because Esport's fantastic.
Yeah, absolutely.
But
I guess we just are lucky to have a good partner in them, right? I think that's a good asset for this process.
Yeah, I definitely agree. And then other programs like through the rec department and through Charting Careers and Seed for Success and, those things that reach out to the whole community.
All right. Thanks, guys.
Denise, hey, I see your hand there.
Hey, hello, everyone. Sorry I got here late. That's why I couldn't introduce myself. But I see a revitalized neighborhood in my purview is that it's decent and safe housing with everything that the prior people spoke of, as well as access to medical care, because there's nothing over there in Eastport that's access unless you go to the hospital. I don't know really a lot about Eastport, but I think one of the biggest things is just decent, safe, affordable housing and a sense of community that's all inclusive, as I think Jessica may have said, or the person prior to her. And of course the schools and everything else that everyone mentioned, but no one mentioned housing. And when you look at some of the areas in and around Eastport, like Eastport and some of the neighborhood around there, I think it all needs to be revitalized and, the houses in and around the community. So that's my comment. Thanks, Eric.
You bet. I should have included the map from, there's a, for folks who weren't here at the last meeting, this planning effort is focusing, the principal focus is on the housing authority communities, Eastport Terrace and Harbor House, with kind of secondary focus on the larger neighborhood around those communities and really trying to integrate those communities better. And so when we submitted our grant application to get the funding for this, we had to present this kind of larger study area, which, for folks who know the neighborhood, we're going to the Eastport Shopping Center to the west. We're going up to, I believe it's Adams Street to the north. We're going down to Tyler Avenue and Hilltop to the south, and then we're going over to Truxton Park to the west. I should say they were Eastport Shopping Center to the east, Truxton Park to the west. So it's a fairly large area, and we want to think about that holistically. Um, there was a lot. I feel like in our discussion at the last meeting, there was a lot of talk about social programs as well. I mean, I tend to think about physical improvements, you know, as leading. But Jane, you have your hand raised. You're on mute.
Hi, I'm Jane Lawrence. I think
oh yeah.
I'm on the board of Seeds for Success, and I really appreciate the comments that have been made about community schools, because organizations like Seeds for Success, Charting Careers, you know, we do try to connect programs to the community schools. That's where, you know, education is going, thank God. And I think a revitalized neighborhood would take advantage of the school assets that we have and expand them. So I've talked to some people on the planning about my little pet project of either or both would be great. Somehow integrating affordable childcare with technical education, but doing it in a way that is tries to be inclusive of the community. So you might have a daycare center, you know, 5-star certified daycare center that has a sliding scale. So if you're higher income, you're paying more. And if you have less income, you're paying less, or maybe it's totally subsidized. I'll give you another example. When I think revitalized, I think trying to connect different parts of the community together. And when I went to the People Task Force meeting, I was really struck that the current residents who were there mentioned the pool. Well, if the plan encompassed a big enough pool, the swim team that Jess will tell you, you know, doesn't necessarily always get what it needs out of Truxton. You could have an Eastport swim team in different ages, different residents, you know, whether you're living in the redeveloped or you're living somewhere else, your kid's on the swimming team. And I bring up these two examples because I think if we think about what this project can bring, we have to think about it, or we should think about it in ways that the whole community uses the amenities, because that will make us a healthier community.
I just want to jump in and say I totally agree, Jane. I think when I think of a revitalized Eastport, I think of an Eastport where we stop having dividing lines based on who we're paying our rent or mortgage to, but based on nothing other than that we all live in Eastport. I think, you know, we have a lot of resources, a lot of great things, and a lot of needs in all parts of the community that are encompassed by this project. And I think it's really important. I think having a goal where we are one Eastport, I think, is really important.
And just, you know, better than anyone on this call, the benefits of neighborhood kids who live across Eastport being together, whether it's, you know, baseball, soccer, the swim team. I'm so pumped about the idea of a swim team because you can get different ages of kids involved in that. And, you know, it's somewhat of a pipeline, at least for summer jobs for kids. And I know there's Truxton very close, but, you know, maybe we need more.
I agree. Or increasing the transportability. I mean, you know, my son right now.
We're losing you, Jess.
Sorry. can you hear me? I was saying increasing the part of that thing with the revitalization and the transportation. One of my sons is currently golfing at Eisenhower with a bunch of kids from all over Eastport, from Harbor House, from President Street, from all over, and ARPD picked them up and took them there. So, including that as part of the amenities, as part of the resources, I think is really important. I agree. I think things like, Jane, you and I have talked a billion times, things like baseball, things like swimming, things where, our kids can get, that's a goal of mine for the entire city, is to have a better community sports program. But I think it's particularly important in Eastport. And we're not far from Truxton. You can walk to Truxton, but letting kids know that you can walk to Truxton, and, creating ways to make it easier for parents and kids to be involved in those things is really, really important.
Right. Agree. And I guess I come back to the technical education. You could, a lot of people are facing issues where, they need to reboot, whether it's the pandemic or the employment field they were in. It was kind of horse and buggy, and now it's not. I know we have limited amounts of acreage, but I just thinking about parts of the program, of the development that serve a range of needs. I agree, a grocery store is great, but there's a lot of slips between the lip and the cup with bringing a grocery store, and it's just but you can design something, build it yourself, say to the school system. Again, Jess can talk about this. There is an oversubscription to the technical education, CAT South, Center for Applied Technology, CAT South and CAT North. And kids that really need that technical education in Annapolis High School are getting squeezed out. And it's a whole complicated reason why. But, if we really want to think about crime and safety, we need to be providing more to the kids that are in high school, about to get out, dropping out, getting across that stage at graduation, but then they just fall off a cliff. So I hear it about grocery stores, but frankly, I think there are more important amenities. Yes, it's tough to get to Giant, but you need a job to buy the groceries.
Melissa, see your hand there.
Yes, one of the things that I think about when I think of revitalization are not only, of course, the improvement of the brick and mortar, but that there are spaces that are created that enable everyone in the neighborhood to enjoy that space more, and to enjoy it in together. So, for example, as we're thinking of the type of amenities, or even in the physical structure or layout of the development, are there spaces that we can create that will encourage more gathering? So, for example, I just use an example. For example, in Charleston, the area I came from right before here, we had a open courtyard in one of our developments that was situated right in the heart of the Battery, which is a very expensive area. But every year in that courtyard, we would host part of the Piccolo Spoleto Jazz Festival, so that everyone in the neighborhood would come to our complex and enjoy jazz, in our courtyard, for example. So I think it can also entail looking at our spaces to see what type of events we could have that would encourage more natural integration, so that the entire community could feel the benefit of the improvements. So whether it be park space or, event space that the city or any other entity can host events. I think, that's what really attracts people in a natural way. It could also include sports facilities, as mentioned about sporting. So I think about it in that way.
Yeah, that's a great segue, I think, to the other part of the meeting, which I'd like to do now, as long as there's no other immediate comments. We'll have time for more discussion later, but I wanted to share some examples of that Matthew helped put together, of kind of what we mean when we talk about revitalized neighborhoods. Another term that people sometimes use is complete community or complete neighborhood. And so I wanted to, before I get into that though, I want to say what we're doing now with the Choice Neighborhood initiative. I think, I've been with the city for 2 years. I think there's been a lot of movement towards this, and we finally gotten to this place. We do a comprehensive plan every 10 years. We're working on an update to it right now. The last one was in 2009. We had a lot of recommendations in there that I think talk about the things we're getting into right now, in terms of land use and high standards we should put on what gets built in the city. And that means housing is a big part of that. Transportation, that really invests in our streets as a public amenity. Complete streets is a term we talk about, that where the design of that street encourages all types of users, not just people who have a personal vehicle, but there's many people who don't, and there's many people who would just rather walk somewhere but don't have a good sidewalk to do it. Our housing recommendations from that plan were encouraging us to move towards this type of a project. Fostering partnerships with others to do that. We had parks recommendations that really emphasize addressing investments for various social groups that either don't have adequate access to parks, or aren't part of the decision-making process. Environmental recommendations that I think speak to what we're trying to do along the creek side of Eastport Terrace and Harbor House at Hawkins Cove. So I'm optimistic, sort of the things that we've been talking about for a while, I think are all part of this conversation. We did a transportation plan in 2016. I think we're going to be looking at, as we start talking about the streetscapes of this area, President Street and Madison Street, for example, are places that see an inordinate amount, the overwhelming amount of activity and aren't really up to the standard they should be. So this is a plan from 2016 that I think we're going to look at. And then finally, every 5 years, our community development division that Teresa leads does the 5-year consolidated housing community development plan. And these are the recommendations that were in the most recent plan that I think speak to some of what we're talking about here: job creation, retention, job training opportunities, vital public services. So I just want to kind of emphasize that I'd like to think that we're not starting from scratch here. We're trying to build on things. That's maybe the planner in me. We're trying to kind of continue some of what we've already been talking about. We have more momentum now. I guess that's the difference. So, and we're bringing more people into the discussion. But I want to hand things over to Matthew to talk about some of the areas that kind of the ingredients of might be a complete neighborhood, that kind of might play off of some of what we're talking about here.
Yeah, great, Eric. Thanks. Hopefully everybody can hear me. So again, like Eric said, he comes at it, I guess, to quote you, Eric, as thinking from the physical realm of planning, and I'm kind of the same way. So I'm going to share some images and some ideas about the ingredients of a complete neighborhood, and I do come from more of a physical, design-oriented perspective. But I think these are framework ideas that I think can help us think about strategies that can help create engagement, connectivity, and perceptions of community, sense of community, identity, and even sense of safety and security in neighborhoods. This list is not complete or exhaustive. There's probably a lot of research out there that have a more robust set of ingredients, but these are my go-to ingredients. I like to think of, the complete neighborhood and it is a walkable and well-connected place where people live and can get those essential ingredients or essential needs for daily life. I think great neighborhoods, from my travels and my design experiences, and even where I live today, there's a focal public space that can bring everybody together. There's a mix of uses. It's not a homogeneous residential community. There's civic structures. There's also commercial places of work, places to get your daily needs. There's housing choice, a variety of housing types to accommodate not only a diverse range of income, but also that can help people meet their current housing needs. For example, a small family might need an extra bedroom or a yard, or maybe perhaps yearn for a small yard so they can let the kid run around and not have to go too far from the living room or kitchen to supervise. Or when the family moves off, maybe someone needs to downsize, or someone who has physical disabilities might need a accommodations to help them with their needs. And so there's different housing types to address all stages and all types of people throughout life. Sometimes we like to think of it as creating a neighborhood that's intergenerational as well. And then, I think I've been living without air conditioning for 3 days. So this hits me pretty well these days, but creating a neighborhood that's resilient. What are the green infrastructure that can help us build resiliency, sustainability in the neighborhood? But there's also, obviously there's the social network elements that help strengthen resiliency of the neighborhood. So, and then I left it as others, because I think there's a lot of great ideas and people in this committee. And so I think, as we move forward, let's improve these ingredients and make this really a Eastport complete neighborhood. So real quick, I'll just Eric, how about next slide?
Yeah, no problem.
So I thought this was interesting. I pulled this up. I put the indicator. This is the walk score. Some people might know this. A lot of realtors use this tool, but I think planners like to use it too, because it gives you a quick sense of how walkable is your community. And currently at the intersection of Madison and President, it is defined as somewhat walkable. So I think some of the things that might be missing, I think the sidewalk connections, the street connections, there might be some fragmented pieces to that in the neighborhood that diminish the overall network. But I think the other elements are there's probably a little bit of distance to daily needs. You know, the grocery store is probably impacting that walk score and downgrading it to a somewhat as opposed to a very walkable community. But honestly, you're not very far off. 69, a score of 69 will get you up into the very walkable walk score range. And so as we go through this, let's think about how we can improve that score and make this a more walkable community. How about next slide? This is a great tool, NACTO. This is a new perspective on how we design streets. You know, they essentially are a collection of engineers, street designers who have really looked at prioritizing what we call complete streets, creating streets that are not just for the automobile, streets that are not designed for highway capacity, but streets that are designed for everybody, from moms with strollers to bicyclists to the transit providers. You know, really valuing all the needs that we need for the street conditions. And so this is a great resource. I know they have a great website if you want to take a look at it. Great ideas that are in on that website for you to take a look at. And as we look at the housing redevelopment and opportunities for reinvestment in infrastructure, I think this team will be looking at the Urban Street Design Guide as a tool. And I'm going to share a couple extra slides. So let's go to the next slide. That we have used that tool. This is an example of a C&I project in Baltimore. So a couple of these projects are real projects. They're examples, not necessarily maybe always the strongest correlation in terms of scale, order of magnitude to the Eastport case, but hopefully I'm trying to address some of the salient ideas that we can borrow from these other communities. And so in the Perkins home redevelopment, Caroline Street was a very important north-south street, and we didn't want this to become another through corridor for cars that are streaming out of the waterfront up to Johns Hopkins Hospital. Everybody agreed that this wanted to be a complete street model for Baltimore City. And so really the ingredients were creating a buffered bike lane, providing access for the bus, and not losing one of the really valuable assets of the street is the curb condition for on-street parking. If you're going to build the curb, you should have parking built into it. On-street parking, parallel parking does a couple things. It provides parking, but it also narrows the perception of width of the street. So it's almost a traffic calming tool that can be applied. And there's other tricks in the hat that we can use. I know I've heard comments from people in the group that, speeding cars on President Street have negatively impact parked cars. But, if we think about restriping, how do we restripe the drive lane to narrow it for the driver, but really provide more elbow room for the parked car? And so, you can see here the top right is the existing condition of Caroline, and the bottom is kind of what we're proposing now. And we're moving through that process, and hopefully in a year's time, before this planning document is done, we'll be able to see this being built up out of the ground. How about the next slide? Again, with Perkins, street connectivity was important, and I'm focusing on the images on the left. Perkins was what was considered a super block, and not dissimilar to the Eastport Terrace layout. There's not a lot of strong street connectivity through Harbor House and Eastport Terrace. And so kind of by definition, it's one large block that for cars and people, it's hard to get through and improve, connectivity. So great neighborhoods, in my opinion, have small block sizes, and the blocks are very walkable. So with Perkins Home, the blocks were grained north-south, and they were really long. A lot of the public spaces were internal to the block, which from a safety perspective was challenging because the activity that people didn't want was happening in those areas, and they were unsupervised. The ambulance could not get into those spaces. The police could not get to those spaces to help people when needed. And so those places became kind of scary places that residents didn't feel comfortable in. And so our strategy was, let's grain this neighborhood differently. Let's make smaller blocks, make the public space a part of the street infrastructure. And so the diagram on the right, the proposed diagram, really starts to illustrate that we really broke down Perkins Home into a series of blocks, smaller blocks for development. But at the heart of that development was that central park space. And we'll come back to that idea as well. And you can see the purple is Caroline Street, that complete street connector that goes through the neighborhood, really tying this neighborhood to not only the blocks of this redevelopment, but to a new City Springs school. We tried to reposition a school into this neighborhood as a civic anchor, but it extends off the page to Johns Hopkins Hospital and to the neighborhoods to the south, where there's a lot more commercial activity. The image on the right is not a CNI project. It's a project that I've worked on with the community in Baltimore. It's a Greenway project. And, you know, I've started to look at the Greenway diagrams for Annapolis. And, you know, what I've heard this evening about connectivity to Truxtun, you know, how do we strengthen that connection between Eastport and Truxtun, and do that in a sensitive way, right? This is an image of a boardwalk. I don't think in Eastport, I don't think we have this significant grade changes, but we do have sensitive soils in that valley that we should think about opportunities to use open space funds to maybe explore a slightly elevated boardwalk to enable the wetlands and the riparian area kind of do what it needs to do. And at the same time, really give a clear walkway for pedestrians to get from one part of Eastport to another part, and do it in a way that feels safe. You know, a lot of times public spaces do not want to be opened at evening. It can be a security issue, but you know, if we can do it in a way that maybe provides lighting on sometimes, particularly in the winter, that might give a little bit more length and use for that infrastructure that we can build in. How about the next slide?
I think I just want to say it's really interesting to see how the green space in the existing is kind of pooled to create this South Central Park, you're calling it, in the proposed. You know, it's almost like when Melissa was talking about these spaces that are designed for gathering, you can kind of see how that becomes that kind of space, you know, it's with the resources that you had available to you. Okay, sorry.
Yeah, and you know, perfect timing, Erica. And so with that, this is another view of the Perkins Home project. So we did pull those small, really deep, not well supervised spaces and aggregated them centrally to create this park space at the middle of the redevelopment. And this is a kind of a concept image on the lower left, kind of look from a bird's eye view looking down. So it's a sizable urban park. Again, this is a very urbanized area, so I think the scale is justified for that. Currently, this project is being designed with the residents of Perkins Home. So this is maybe 3 years after receiving the CNI grant money or implementation funds that we're actually getting into the design. So these things, I say that because these things do take time. And I think the planning document that we spoke of at the beginning of the meeting that we'll produce next year, you know, the details of those open spaces may not be fully resolved, but what we want to do in this planning document is create a roadmap and identify those key features, the park space and the location of the park space as priorities, and develop out of that document a process and resources to execute those projects. So, you know, I think those are the things that we'll be looking for with this final planning document. So how about we go to the next page, which is a completed park space in a choice neighborhood development. This is up in Massachusetts. I was not a part of the design team on this. I think Ray knows it well, but they had a similar story where they aggregated their park space at the intersection of 3 streets in the middle of this community of the redevelopment of the Box District. They had some topographical challenges to deal with, but they did, what I really love about this project is they packed a lot of opportunity in an open space to make it engaging, active, and welcoming for all the people of the district. You know, there is something in there for everybody. There's something there for kids. There's something there for seniors. There's something there for families, and it's all there within view of the public realm, the streets, and the community around them. And it's not hidden. It's not pushed away. It's a very welcoming space. How about the next slide?
Let's see. There you go.
You know, I think when this could go before or after the open spaces or connected with kind of the complete street strategies. But, you know, today, particularly in the state of Maryland, I think we've become leaders in stormwater management. And I think this is, you know, when we think about resiliency, sustainability, and we think about curb reductions or road diets, as they say, to kind of, or traffic calming measures, these things can be integrated together. These are some examples with not far away from us of how they've created stormwater facilities off of the curb line, kind of retrofitting the curb line to get biological or ecological benefit from these drainage areas, greening opportunities, but also it serves as a traffic calming measure. It starts to narrow the perceived width of that roadway. And these can be used very successfully, like completely integrated into new road design. I'll show you some examples of that. But they can be retrofitted. You know, where would these things work really well, not only from a drainage perspective, but maybe as a gateway opportunity into the neighborhood, or an area where the pedestrian needs a little bit extra refuge and safety. But also thinking resiliency, if these trees can grow taller, I think the tree selection that they have in the top right may not be the best trees. I'm not an arborist, but if you're an arborist on the team, you can probably weigh in on this. But what if we can get shade trees that can get a little taller canopy, and provide shade coverage for these hot summer days that we've been having? And then the bottom image on the right, it's not a stormwater facility. This is kind of a mock-up or a pilot type of project. And these are things that, you know, a lot of neighborhoods are doing. Let's map out with very inexpensive material how we can make pedestrian improvements in our community, where we might want to have a curb cut, or a curb extension to promote walkability. Let's map it out. Let's test it. If we're not happy with these results, that's, you know, the paint and the little flex bollards, it's not very expensive. You know, maybe there's an opportunity to work with DOT, or even within the housing site to explore these opportunities to create enhanced pedestrian features without a lot of you know, expensive infrastructure that might not be the ultimate solution. How about the next slide?
Let's see. There we go.
If you were part of the housing task force meeting, you may have seen some of these slides. But again, I think we want to address like housing choice, having a variety of housing types, a range from, you know, on the top left, you know, flats on the ground floor with a townhouse type units up above, over to kind of multifamily, perhaps senior housing with an elevator. You know, one of the benefits of having a building with an elevator is that it enables us to achieve fair housing goals better. It enables us to have the ability to have more accessible units. And so, you know, we can think about the trade-offs of having units that have stairs, which make it a little bit more difficult with those with disabilities, with a 4-story building or a 3-story building with an elevator. Obviously, elevators cost more, so we tend to aggregate those in bigger buildings. But again, looking at a whole variety of housing types, from townhouses to stacked flats, you know, there's the idea of the missing middle, that kind of that range of small scale multifamily buildings that can provide an increase in density without feeling like you're living in an urban neighborhood, trying to keep it in that kind of dare I say, kind of village kind of feel that we might aspire to in Eastport. How about the next slide?
I think just to add, I think what a lot of these buildings have in common is just their facades are really varied, which kind of creates interesting streetscapes and, sort of tries to blend in with existing context in many cases. So, that's something we're really thinking about a lot here, I guess, as these buildings relate to the streets.
Yeah, they have that a really nice kind of zone between the public realm and the private realm, with the stoop, the covers over the front doors, and the diversity of materials and scale and sizes really create kind of visual interest in the community. And I think that's always important, particularly for people who like to walk around and experience all that visual interest. Mixed use, again, an important ingredient to communities, and we can do this horizontally, but we can also do mixed use vertically at a variety of different scales. The top right images are very small scale mixed use buildings with 2 levels of apartments up above, to the Hendon project on the top left, which has 3 levels of units over top of retail. I will just preface from my experiences. I'm not a developer, but I've worked with developers to execute these from a planning and design perspective. A lot of mixed use buildings need the bedrooms up above to help offset the cost of providing retail or community serving opportunities on the street level. Everybody wants the active street level, but there is a certain scale and cost that goes into it, where oftentimes, and I think you'll see this particularly in I guess more greenfield developed areas, taller buildings with more units up above to help offset the cost of the retail on the ground floor. The image on the lower left, it's a tall building. This is a project that's near and dear to me. This is it was designed as a 4-story, or I should say a 5-story building with 4 levels of residential over top of a whole suite of neighborhood serving retail, a bank, a pharmacy, all on the ground floor, which was really important to this neighborhood, which lacked any daily needs in that community. In the process, we had a very fortunate opportunity to work with Johns Hopkins Healthcare, and they really wanted to provide a kind of neighborhood serving medical suite, something that they've kind of been thinking about and really wanted to provide in this neighborhood as a pilot. So that second floor is actually a whole suite of doctor's offices. And so it's all right there in this one building. It really demonstrates that you can really pack a lot of opportunity into one building, particularly if you get the right developer that knows how to really draw from a diverse pool of economic resources. And this building was designed not necessarily as an affordable building, but it was geared towards a moderate market rate community within this neighborhood in Baltimore. I should say it's all surrounded by 2-story townhouses. So there is a little bit of scale transition, but we tried to work with that by allowing that Howard Bank in the front left to kind of scoot out and start to marry up with the townhouses nearby. And then, there's a lot of opportunity to think about the retail of retail creating place and opportunity. What I like about the image on the bottom right in Seattle is that it's really, the retail is really placed in a way that creates a synergy, vitality, life that the residents can enjoy, but also for people visiting to those retail establishments on the ground floor. And it should be noted that we don't necessarily need to have an active ground floor. We don't necessarily need retail. So a lot of times we can do amenities, facilities on the ground floor to help activate it. And I did want to share some other projects because I've been hearing about these 2 particular programs that are potentially important. Giant in Philadelphia is exploring a small scale market. This heirloom building on the left is it's not very big for a grocery store. It's only 9,500 square feet, which is very, very small. If you think about your standard Giant, they're usually about 55,000 square feet. So this is a very tiny grocery store format, kind of a bodega style, trying to provide fresh food in the neighborhood. And it's done in a very small block, small footprint format. And then the image on the right is in Massachusetts and Chelsea, where they've integrated an early learning center in a multifamily building. So they've kind of just raised up the footprint because space is limited in Chelsea to allow the early learning center to kind of be incorporated in that building. I will say that the front door of the facility is on the opposite side of the apartments. So there's kind of some separation and safe distancing from the daily activity of the apartment building, from the daily activity of the early learning. But the early learning does face out onto a park space across the street. And this building, if you go to Chelsea, if you know Boston, there's a lot of diversity of building scales and heights all mixed together in neighborhoods. And they feel, what I like about Chelsea is it has kind of a feel that I feel when I come to Eastport. There's a lot of small scale buildings, and I think there's opportunities to have some larger scale buildings kind of be incorporated without losing that kind of charm of the small village feel. How about the next slide?
This is the last one in the series.
Yep. And this is up in Howard County, and this is a project that I've been working on for over 10 years. Some of these things take a long time, but in terms of resiliency, we went over the top in this project, and I hope we can do the same here in Eastport, because when we looked at the heat map diagram for the neighborhood, which we saw at the last presentation, there is a hot spot in the Eastport Terrace Harbor House area, and that's really due to there's some beautiful trees. I should say that first, but there is a lot of just open lawn space, flat land that really contributes, and the parking lots that really contribute to this urban heat. And so in this neighborhood, this redevelopment, we went over the top. We exceeded the local jurisdiction's tree canopy goals almost 2 to 1. And you can see in the image on the right, we really packed in these canopy trees to really create a strong edge to the street, which is also a traffic calming strategy, but also provides shade to residents on the street. That greenway in the middle of that image, just to the left of that car, is actually a bioretention facility. We placed these beautiful trees, birch trees that just took off, and they're gorgeous year round. They great visual display throughout the year, but they also had great ecological benefit. And again, with the image on the left, just wherever, this is standard practice these days, and you're going to see it with any new development, but stormwater management integrated with the landscape everywhere you go. So that's kind of the new format, packing them in with trees, providing those bioretention facilities in a way that's incorporated with the sidewalks and the landscape. At the same time, trying to create those views down the pathways that really help create kind of a sense of visibility and safety in that neighborhood.
Yeah, I mean, there's sadly been a lot of research done that correlates places that don't have good tree canopy as frequently being lower income, disadvantaged socioeconomic communities. So that's something we definitely want to reverse here. And there's equally as much documentation that's showing how life expectancy and health outcomes get a big boost from having healthy tree canopy in a community. So I want to use the rest of the time. Thank you, Matthew, for going through all those examples. I think these meetings, we're going to try to bring in ideas from other places just to kind of show people what other communities have done, particularly choice neighborhood projects. But in the remaining time we have, I want to provide some opportunity to talk about specific objectives, and with the goal being to identify some early action projects. And this is something that HUD wants to see as part of this project. I think it's a good idea. And the essence here are quick, short-term projects, relatively quick projects that could be implemented more easily than the larger redevelopment that could kind of set the stage, provide some immediate impact. And so I wanted to, this is just the description from HUD. We have a certain amount of funding. We have $100,000 identified for these projects. And just wanted to start, we can revisit this at the next meeting, but I wanted to see if folks had ideas about, and they could play off of things we've already talked about. But notice the emphasis on physical. That's that. Maybe we've talked about social programs too, but Bill, I see you have your hand.
Yeah, Eric, a couple of questions, and then I have a suggestion on a quick project. Is this request a project for an idea that goes into the plan within the next 2 years, or something that could actually be implemented, like a small, succinct project that could be implemented within the next 2 years?
I think it's the latter. It's something that could be implemented before the plan is even done, perhaps.
So is some of the money that's incorporated or allocated to the plan going to be available for this, for the implementation of such a quick project?
That's right.
Okay, well,
Maggie, right? You're shaking your head.
Yes, so that 100,000 that was in the slide before this is set aside to do these activities. They're also called planning activities, but the whole idea is to get some momentum, create more cohesion, give people something tangible to sort of do together while we're going through this big, lengthy process. Let's have something that we can result that will really help. So yeah, so that $100,000 is meant to actually pay for what that project is, and it needs to be completed in 2 years. So it's short.
I have a suggestion for your list, and it's one that the ECA has been looking at and researching for the last year. And that's traffic calming down on Presidents and Boucher and the streets in that area. I think a number of the people who are with us this evening can weigh in on what a perpetual problem that is. We did some research on the ECA. We had a small task group ourselves within the year, did some research on that, came up with some ideas, but in the presentation we saw this evening, I saw examples of some pretty low cost, curb modifications, line painting and all of that. And I'm just going to honestly tell you that when we made contact with the city about that, we just got a cold shoulder. We just get the answer that there's no money for any of this, okay? And it just dies. So my suggestion is for a quick, necessary project, do some traffic calming in some of the critical areas down there.
Thanks for suggesting that. Yeah, I mean, I know people that park on President Street have to put cones out next to their car to avoid there is a history of the city doing those kinds of projects, though. I'm glad you're being honest about the kind of reception you've gotten. But there is one example currently happening. I know at the Bakers and Company site on Chesapeake, I think the city is about to turn that demonstration project into an actual bulb out at the corner.
Well, not to belabor that point, Eric, do you know how long it took to get that?
I don't.
2 years. 2 years.
It was longer than that, Bill.
Yes, Jess and I will tell you, longer than 2 years.
Okay, well, longer than I lived here. But anyway, we spent the last 8 months working out a MOU with the city because they wanted the ECA to indemnify them against the plants that we were going to put in that traffic calming island. I don't want to go in there too much, but we can do better. And if this group can get it together and we got a little money, let's do something that people can actually look at. And okay, enough of that, but thanks for the opportunity.
Thanks for that. That's a good suggestion. So let's go. I see Jess and Karen both. Go ahead, Jess.
Eric, I was going to say that my suggestion sort of along the lines of what Bill was saying, but is sidewalks just in general. Last year they did a big, so I know that with the redevelopment, there may be some change of the sidewalks probably between, Jackson and President or Jackson and Wells, but last year they redid a lot of the sidewalks in at the upper part of President Street. And, there's a lot of kids and a lot of people that walk from Harbor House and Eastport Terrace and the surrounding homes to go to Annapolis Middle School and to go to the Tyler Heights area and just in general. And when they redid those sidewalks, they redid them to the same small non-ADA regulated scale that they were previously. And when it was brought up, they said, well, that's a capital project to bring them to full size. And it wasn't in the projects and that plan, so they couldn't do that. Same thing down at the other end. Lisa and I were talking in the chat about, the sidewalks don't extend all the way down to Boucher. And that's a really dangerous intersection right there. I know it sounds small when you're, resident, but when you're a person who's walking that intersection, you're trying to walk with your family or your dog or whatever down President Street to Boucher, the lack of sidewalks there is a problem, as well as the lack of sidewalks completing along Madison Street. There's sidewalk on the first half of the first block of Madison from Bay Ridge, and then there's no sidewalk on that side. So you get a lot of people walking in the streets. And I know on the more residential streets, walking in the streets isn't that problem. I do that all the time. But on streets like Madison, where people are turning in and out, something like that to make it easier and more efficient and safer for families, for people in wheelchairs, for people with strollers, to walk to our primary shopping center, and then to also be able to walk down Boucher and up to Tyler, and probably do something about that crosswalk at Tyler and President would be great too. I think something like that would be not a huge project, but it would make a major difference in terms of everyday accessibility for everyone who lives in the city, who lives in Eastport. And I think redoing the sidewalks to ADA and all the way from Tyler down to Boucher would also help encourage some of the traffic calming that we desperately need. I mean, I had to stand out. There were a bunch of kids riding big wheels in the street today, not in the street, but in the parking lot across the street. And I had to stand out there and watch because people just fly through that President Street and Madison Street intersection. They don't pay attention. And same thing, they fly up from the Boucher and President and they don't pay attention. And I was sure that one of the kids was, flying down in their big wheel was going to have a problem. Doing something to make those streets and do some of the traffic calming or street sidewalk and also water retention type things that you were talking about would be a short-term thing that would benefit the entire community.
One way of addressing what you're talking about, since, you're right that a lot of the sidewalks will probably be improved as part of the larger project, but in the short term, I don't know how many of you are familiar with what is happening over by Germantown Elementary on the other side of town, but where it's similar to this condition on President at Boucher, where you don't have the sidewalks and you kind of have yards going up to the street. It does become a very time-intensive process to sort of work with the homeowners and create the sidewalk space, but they actually carved out, using Flexi Post, they sort of carved out a temporary sidewalk area that actually acts as a traffic calming measure as well. So that could be a solution that would be relatively cost effective. And
I think that would be great. And some of the areas aren't going to be affected, right? Like Madison is unlikely to be affected by the redevelopment. So that stretch between President and Bay Ridge, redoing the sidewalks and making those sidewalks ADA and, would help in a lot of ways, as well as the section from Eastport Terrace up to Tyler and from, Wells down, or maybe Park down to Boucher, those areas are unlikely to be touched by the redevelopment. So those could be worked on for permanent solutions. But I have seen that stuff at Germantown, and I think that would be a great temporary thing as well. I think, there's a lot of ideas that we could come together and do, but not like what they did in West Annapolis. I don't think anyone's happy with that.
Right. Okay. Karen, go for it.
I guess what was in my head was Sherritt Square, and which I think is in Portland, Oregon. And basically it's a place where it's an intersection that the residents took it upon themselves to paint the intersection and to add, like, put little free libraries along it and benches and things. And it calmed the traffic because of just the visual of it. And then it also became like a sort of a community center point where people came together and interacted with each other. And I always thought that that would be a cool thing for this neighborhood. And it would be pretty easy to do because you're just painting it. And if it doesn't work out, you just remove the paint. But I think at Sherritt Square, and so it's two words, share it, like you're sharing. Yeah, Sherritt Square. I think that's what they called it. And in Portland, they just painted a giant mandala in the intersection. And it's like a tourist thing now. I haven't seen it in person myself, but I hear that it's like a tourist attraction now. But that might be a way, because one of the slides showed where they had, in DC, where they were trying out the curb extensions with paint. So maybe that would be an easy way to kind of try out something and see if it might help with the traffic calming or help with creating like a community focal point of some sort.
That's a great idea. I mean, there's a lot of examples of that. And I think that could also, that's kind of like a true community involvement project as well. I think that I have a good friend who's done a lot of these types of projects in Baltimore at different intersections. Let's see, we got.
I did put hey Eric, real quick. I did put a link to that Sherritt Square in the chat. Good. You want to take a look at what those images are? They're there.
Okay. I should say I appreciate everybody putting comments in the chat. I mean, that I should have said at the beginning, but we encourage that. We save those, and I know it's easier for some people to share their ideas that way. So we're just about 8 o'clock. I think we're going to want to continue this conversation at the next meeting and follow up on some of these ideas. And I'll probably send a prompt to everybody, including those who couldn't make it tonight. That's something to be thinking about. I think there's a lot of opportunity here, but we're gonna just.
Hey Eric, quick question: are your slides and the notes you took available?
They will be. So our project website is eastportcni.org. And our Mitchell Stevenson, our public information officer for the city, maintains that website, and she posts everything from these meetings there, including the recording of the meeting. And so they'll probably be there tomorrow or the next day. But yeah,
Thanks a lot.
Yeah. Just before we go, continue to spread the word about this project and feel free to bring others to this. I mean, I think ultimately we're going to have a core neighborhood task force group that have been in most of these meetings, and we have some others who come and go. But I put out a question at the last meeting about committees. Sometimes that happens with task forces. There's some breakout committees that focus on specific topics. I think since then, one thought I had was that we may have to have some separate discussions about certain issues, but I don't know that we're going to be able to form these smaller committees. It's more time. They really need focused interest from task force members. And so what I think we'll ultimately do is have dedicated meetings in between these larger meetings where we can delve into some issues like transportation, perhaps, And I think that's just kind of the way I'd like to handle it. Jane, do you have a comment?
Eric, I would like to put a pin in which I think you are all doing this, but I have found attending the housing task force, I missed the tour, attending the people, really helpful, but I don't think we can all go to all of them. So maybe we could have a template where at the beginning of this meeting, you could kind of brief people on what's going on the other two.
That's a great idea. I can definitely do that. And I'll plan on that next time. Yeah.
And for instance, an example, I'm really looking forward to the results of the resident survey and the market survey. And I think we will all be more impactful and helpful to you if this task force understands all that, even though that might be really the province of two other task forces.
Yeah, that's a great point. I'll probably have an opportunity to share some of that at this as well.
And Eric, another thing we could do is once we have all that information, we could do like a joint task force meeting, like we did in the beginning in May, maybe for those big, sort of level setting type of presentation. So we can be flexible about that, but that's a great idea, Jane.
Okay, good idea. I'm writing that down. Lastly, it's been raised. I think I'm interested in having a neighborhood survey, available. I think it's maybe the easiest way for people who live in the broader neighborhood to participate in this, if they don't want to attend these meetings. And I think it's just a chance to kind of solicit some more input from people living in the neighborhood and just give another opportunity to chime in here, so that people, they have that opportunity while we're doing this project. And when it comes time to make decisions, we've provided those opportunities. So I think I might put this on the next agenda, but if folks have opinions about things that they want in that survey, you can email me. Again, this is where I'm at, but I think you got the calendar invite from me, so feel free to reach out. But we'll plan on having another. I know August could be sparse, but maybe it'll be early September. We'll have another meeting in a month from now, more or less. So, any final?
Can I ask you a question?
Yeah.
Has any thought been given to the conversation about having not a neighborhood survey, but a neighborhood meeting and sort of update? Because like we talked about, there's a lot of people in the neighborhood, particularly in the President Street and Colony Hills and this general area, who are going to be directly affected, but may not be interested in necessarily task force, but also may not be receiving the information. So having a community meeting that explains.
Keep losing you, Jess.
Sorry. I don't know why my internet's doing that, but having a community meeting for everyone, the same type of meeting that was had for the people who live within the housing authority, but with Harbor House and Eastport Terrace, but for everybody else who's going to be affected, not just a survey, but also, just here, this is where we are. This is what the plan is for people who may not be interested in being on the I don't know what you heard and what you didn't heard of what I was saying. But.
Yeah, to answer that, if I may, Eric and Maggie, you can chime in too, but we are planning a community neighborhood-wide meeting in September. I think it's September 21st. Don't quote me on that, 20th. But we plan on having an evening meeting, open house there at the Eastport Terrace Community Center. Everyone is welcome to come. The goal of that meeting is really to kind of review kind of our existing conditions and kind of set the stage for a vision session in like following that, maybe like a month or so later. But that's kind of the intent is, again, to create that summation of existing conditions, get people to view our data, identify if we're missing something collectively as a whole community. And you'll be seeing marketing information coming out shortly. So please do share that when you receive it.
Yeah.
And if you really want to be an advocate and participate, we'd be happy to have someone from the task force, volunteer to take notes or something like that at a station.
Yeah, and actually, just because of your connection to the school system, I mean, we're trying to do a youth planning component as well. That might be a good thing. So, yeah,
I'm happy to help however I can.
Okay.
Yeah, I might connect with you later, Jessica, on how we can maybe expand our enrollment. We do plan on doing like just before the one of the meetings, early evening, late afternoon, doing kind of a quick hour meeting with the youth of the surrounding area, and just kind of get their sense and perspective of the neighborhood and what they like, what they don't like.
I have 4 of them right here, so I can certainly help with my connections, your friends and everything else. So happy to help.
All right. Well, thank you, everybody. Good conversation tonight, and we'll keep it going. So stay in touch. You'll be hearing back from me in a couple weeks, probably about the next meeting date. So, all right. Have a good night.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.